Dogworks Radio is sponsored by Alaska Dogworks. Check out their website at alaskadogworks.com.
Hi, this is Alex Stein, co-host of Mushing Radio on Dogworks Radio. We just completed our first storytelling season on the 1925 Serum Run. Almost 100 years later, the 1925 Serum Run is something that is still inspirational, amazing, and in many ways larger than life. We've gathered all of these episodes together on one page to make it easier for you to listen to them in order. Just go to dogworksradio.com/serumrun. That's SERUMRUN, no space, dogworksradio.com/serumrun. And while you're at it, don't forget to subscribe to Dogworks Radio at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever it is that you go to listen to podcasts.
Start your day tomorrow with The Daily Dog with Michelle Forto, the morning podcast on Dogworks Radio. Apple Podcast reviewer Patty Christensen calls it funny, smart, and filled with all the info I want to know about dogs. I love this show. Wake up with The Daily Dog, available on Dogworks Radio on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your shows.
Radio Free Palmer 89.5 KVRF presents Mushing Radio, hosted by Robert Forto. Mushing Radio is about dog-powered sports, living in the Great White North, and mushing. Visit our website at mushingradio.com. Here is your host, Robert Forto.
Hello and welcome, everybody. This is Robert Forto, and you're listening to our daily coverage on Mushing Radio of the 2018 Iditarod here on KVRF 89.7 in the Mat-Su Valley. You can find all of our podcast episodes over on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Play, and more. Just search for Dogworks Radio on any app that you use for your podcast. You can also find us on dogworksradio.com. We have about 9 years of podcast episodes over there, so you can listen till your heart is content for sure. And calling in today from Southern California is my co-host, Alex Stein. Alex, how's it going?
It's going really well, and I have to say that this has turned out to be a very, very exciting Iditarod. It seemed for a while like things were just being very straightforward and progressing without too many surprises. We had some big surprises, the big lead change yesterday, and we now have the top three teams in White Mountain getting ready to leave White Mountain. Soon is Your Awesome, and they actually have left White Mountain about 5 minutes ago, followed by Nick Pettit and Mitch Seavey. And, we hate to still, anything can happen, even in the last 77 miles, but barring any real unforeseen circumstances, it looks like Your should be the new Iditarod champion sometime around 2 in the morning Alaska time.
Wow, Dee Dee Genre was on the local news last night, and she's doing some commentary for them on KTVA, the official Iditarod channel up here, the CBS channel, and she was talking about them finishing at about 6 a.m., but she said that this is a working dogs race, meaning that the trail is slow and it takes real hardy sled dogs. It's not a sprint race by any means or imagination, as it's been in the last few years, especially with Dallas Seavey having such great success with what he calls unleashing the monster and just really putting the pedal to the metal, really these last 70 miles or so, or maybe a little even further back when he really gets into gear. So this is a different type of race for a number of reasons. It's been a while since a European has been a champion, hasn't it, Alex?
Yeah, and it's a very exciting thing when someone from outside Alaska, especially, but even outside the U.S. and Canada, wins the Iditarod. It's something that doesn't happen very often. It's happened a few times, but Your is someone who really has just kind of taken Iditarod by storm. In his rookie year, he had I believe the fastest ever rookie time in in Iditarod. He was Rookie of the Year in 2013, and he's just gone on to really every year been doing better and better. He's had 5 top 10 finishes in a row. Has been in 4th place twice, and like I said, this year, barring any unforeseen, thing that completely upends the race, it looks like he's going to be the next Iditarod champion.
I've talked to Yor a few times. I don't think he's been on our show, but I've talked. He lives right here in Willow, and I've had a chance to speak with him on occasion. And for folks that don't know, he is here on like an athlete's visa, so very similar to like an Olympic athlete who travels to another country to live. And I remember him telling me when we spoke that he is unable to work when he's here. He's not allowed to earn any type of living whatsoever, and he's been itching to start a company or have a job or something like that, but he's unable to really garner a paycheck while he's here. Now, of course, he does have some really good support with his sponsors and things. But just imagine, Alex, he's been up here for several years now. Like you said, the last 4 or 5, he's been in the top 10 in terms of finishing. But just imagine going 4 or 5 years and not having some type of stable paycheck and having all of those expenses for Iditarod coming up every year, and in particular as Iditarod approaches.
And that's got to be very, very difficult, as we've talked many times about just how expensive it is to not only to train and keep sled dogs, but then to enter the race. And there are a lot of not only is there the race entry fee, there's the fee for drop bags that are sent to various checkpoints if it's over a certain weight, which it almost always is for all of the top competitors. So there's a lot of stuff that goes into fielding a team, and especially a team that is competitive at this level. The one other thing I wanted to mention is in the past, there's kind of been the feeling that once teams get onto the coast, that there's not as much of a need to have as many dogs. And so we've seen a lot of the top teams drop some of the underperforming dogs, so that at times it's not at all unusual for teams to finish with 9 or 10 dogs. And it looks like this year that might be a bit of an exception, especially with all of the soft snow and all of the the snow that really takes a while to slog through, that there might be a real advantage to teams that have most of their dogs still coming into the last part of the race.
Right, and that's what Didi was saying on the news last night. It's not that typical sprint up the coast there. It takes some real work to get through all of the snow that's been happening on the trail in particular. And it's been mighty warm. Here in Willow today, I took out my expedition students for some bike joring, and it was 37 degrees here at 3 o'clock this afternoon. And the snow, while we have a lot of it, and we got a little bit more last night, the snow is already melting relatively quickly here in Willow. So I can imagine if any of these guys are running during the day on any point of the Iditarod Trail, it's still quite warm. And I know we've talked about it before, 30-degree temperatures is almost the top of when sled dogs perform really well, or well enough to be able to accomplish the task. That magic spot on the thermometer is about 10 above to 10 below. That's sort of the sweet spot for a sled dog team. That's when they're really, all the gears are clicking and they're rocking and rolling for sure. So it looks like about 2 a.m. local time is when we'll have a finisher. I don't know if I will be up that late. I'm sure I will get the text updates from the local news affiliates and things saying that we have a champion. What about you, Alex? I know we were talking off air. It's my understanding that you've been invited to an all-night cafe that has Wi-Fi. What are your plans for the evening? My
friend Kathy Mattis, who is a big Iditarod fan and had adopted a retired sled dog who unfortunately passed away recently, texted me this afternoon and said, "So where are we going? Are we going to meet and watch the teams come in?" I think it's a little bit late for me because it'll be 3 a.m. But
right.
But if I am awake, I'll be watching it. Getting back to the number of dogs, I'm just looking at the top standings, and I noticed that Mitch only has 9 dogs in harness when he left or when he got into White Mountain, and I'm wondering if that maybe is enough of a factor. Yor had 12 coming into White Mountain, although he seems to have only left with 10 for his last 77 miles. But I'm wondering if those, if not having the power of those 3 additional dogs would be enough with this year's snow cover and snowpack to have made that difference, because Yor came in about 6.5 hours ahead of Mitch. So, that's in a 1,000-mile race, 6 hours is relatively close.
Right. But then again, 6 hours is very tough to overcome. At this rate, they're probably topping out at speeds at maybe 8 or 9 miles an hour, possibly 10, depending on trail conditions. So if they're both clipping along at relatively the same pace, I think it would be nearly impossible unless something happens or if Yor needs to stay a bit in safety, which is probably unlikely. Most of them just kind of sign the logbook and blow out of there. But yeah, 6 hours is kind of a tough place to overcome unless, again, something happens, and it definitely very well could. You had asked about the differences in power between 12 dogs or 9 dogs. Now, yes, there is a considerable amount of power difference there, but remember, and I know we've mentioned this several times, you're only as fast as the slowest dog. So if your slowest dog is a 8-mile-an-hour dog, it doesn't really matter if you have 8 or 10 or 12 dogs on the line. If that slow dog that you kept in harness and decided to continue on to Nome is an 8-mile trotter, or just kind of in his or her gears to kind of stay at that speed, that's about the fastest you're going to go, because you cannot push a dog necessarily to go much faster than it's capable of course. So while I think power is important, I think speed is a little bit more important than power, at least in terms of this last 77 miles or so. And then, of course, as they get into safety, just 25 miles, which is 2 or 3 hours or so, depending on the speed of the dogs.
Right. And we've had a relatively small number of scratches in this race, at least compared to the past few years. And I think the last time that we ran on the southern route, there were well over a dozen scratches, when we were halfway into the race. Up until this afternoon, we only had 5 scratches. We had 3 this afternoon. Tom Schoenberger, who was running in the Red Lantern position with his team of all purebred Siberian Huskies, scratched in Grayling. And then Alan Moore scratched in Caltag. He was fighting off some sort of flu bug or something. And really was not feeling very well at all. So he scratched in Caltag. Reportedly, his team was doing fine, but with a musher not able to fully do all of the things that they need to do to take care of the dogs, that's a much better decision than to just push forward. And then Wade Mars scratched in Koyuk. Reportedly, he has or seem to have the beginnings of pneumonia. So that's obviously that's a much more serious thing than just having the flu, and is not something that you want to mess around with when you are out in the middle of nowhere or out somewhere where you are potentially hours away from getting help, even if you hit the SOS button on your GPS tracker.
Right, and Alex, typically it's the lesser known mushers that are the ones that are scratching. It's those middle to the pack guys that are the ones that end up calling it quits, so to speak. But we've had some relatively big names this year who has scratched from the race. I know both the Reddingtons, Robert and Ryan had scratched. I believe Ray is still in it, if I'm not mistaken. And you said Alan Moore, Wade Mars, Dee Genreau. Those are big names in our sport. And, people can scratch for various reasons, but often you don't see the really high-profile guys scratching nearly as much as the middle to the back of the packers. Is that your understanding as well?
Absolutely, and especially in the case of Wade Mars, I think he was on track for a top 10 and possibly a top 5 finish this year. But if you're just sick and you're not up to it, then you're sick and you're not up to it. And so there's a cliche that people say that really this race is about the dogs, and sometimes it can seem, especially with certain kennels or with the way certain people act towards the race, like maybe that's not as true as it should be. But in the case of Wade Mars, certainly he probably could have continued and just sort of hung on to the back of the sled, but that's not really a prudent thing to do. So ultimately, it's very clear that not only was it for his good, but also for the good of his team that he stopped where he stopped.
Right. Now, before we do our Musher Profile of this evening, I want to talk a little bit about Mush the Movie. It's a documentary that you made several years ago. I believe it was in 2009 and 2010. I know you were up here for the 2010 Iditarod. Well, I had 6 of my expedition students. We did an expedition this year as a course through the University of Alaska in Anchorage, and all of the students this afternoon took a couple of hours and sat down and watched your documentary. And it was not an assignment, Alex. It wasn't something on the course syllabus that we had to watch Alex Stein's movie. But they took it upon themselves. They found it on the video rack. And when my assistant and I, Miranda, came in from doing some trail work, they were all huddled around the TV watching your movie. So I want to give just a couple of minutes here for you to promote your movie a little bit. I know it's several years old, but obviously it's a timeless classic. People are still loving it today, even though it was made almost 8 years ago. Tell us what Mush the Movie is about, and how can folks find it or buy a copy if they're so inclined?
Sure. Mush the Movie came about because I became somewhat obsessed with the Iditarod in the early 2000s and started following it very closely, learning all I could about it, and then came up to Anchorage for a couple of years to watch the ceremonial start and the restart, and just fell in love really with the culture of Iditarod and with all of the strange and silly events that go on around the Iditarod. So I'm obviously very excited about the race as a competition and the race as a sporting event. I'm also fascinated by all of the little customs and things that go on around the race. Like, for example, there's a custom when the ceremonial start goes into the woods, there are people who have parties in the woods and they hand out muffins and hot dogs, and the mushers and the Iditariders will come through and get food from these people, and it's really a wonderful party. I also, I went up to a bunch of the checkpoints and got a chance to talk to Iditarod Air Force pilots and checkers and vet techs and veterinarians and race officials and just fans. When I was in Nome, I kind of fell in love with the fact that there is all sorts of silly and wonderful things that go on in Nome. They have the Nome National Forest, which essentially is this area out on the sea ice where people haul their Christmas trees every year, and they have a sign now that says it's the Nome National Forest, and there's a golf tournament that it takes place out on the sea ice where they set up little holes, and people rent golf clubs and out of one of the bars and go and play that. And I kind of fell in love with that, and I thought that no one had really captured that. And the Iditarod Trail Committee does an amazing job every year with putting out documentaries that talk about the race as a race, but it mostly only covers the top, 4 or 5 contenders and doesn't really go into anything that's not directly about the race and the competition. So I made this movie. It premiered at the Anchorage International Film Festival in late 2010, on CBS in Alaska a few times. And people who are interested in it or want to buy a copy of it, it is available at mushthemovie.com. At the moment, it is not on any streaming service. We're working on that, but people can go to mushthemovie.com if they're interested in it. And I am always thrilled when people react positively to it. One of my friends who's a musher, who's lived in Alaska all of his life, said to me, "It's amazing that someone who doesn't live in Alaska was able to make this movie because it really captured the spirit of Iditarod." And for me, that's really the most touching thing that anyone could say about it.
You and I met at that premiere there at the Anchorage Film Festival way back in December of 2010, and we met at the Beartooth Theater. I remember walking up and shaking your hand for the first time there, and watching the movie, and just falling for it. And big things have come from that, at least in terms of this radio show and doing all that we've done together. So I think it's a very cool project. But I have to ask about one story that I'd forgotten all about, and that was the story about how you almost got kicked out of the state of Alaska, if not the Iditarod itself. Can you tell us that story, and who was that musher, if you remember? I think I caught who it was as he was driving by.
I'm not sure who it was, but it was coming out of the checkpoint in McGrath, and I was standing on the side. There was a berm where the trail goes back down to the river, and the dogs just kind of came over to me rather than continuing down the trail. And I was naive and kind of terrified that I was somehow interfering with the race and the musher to be disqualified or that I would be thrown out of Alaska or something like that. And it really, I didn't know nearly as much about the Iditarod as I do now. And it was really scary because I wanted to just observe. I didn't want to interfere in any way, but I was afraid that just by being there and the dogs coming over to me, that I was somehow interfering with the race.
Right. And it looked awful lot like the middle of the night. It was pitch dark there when those dogs, and they literally stopped and checked you out and said, "Hey, who is this guy on the side of the trail?" And you know what, Alex?
Right.
I was looking at that portion of the movie today, and I can almost swear that I saw the side panels on the sled that said Team Baker. So I believe it was John Baker when he was leaving McGrath there that you held up for a considerable amount of time. He didn't scream and holler at you, at least what you caught on film, but he was sidelined for a minute there. Did you get a chance to talk to John at all during the making of your movie?
No, I didn't. But John is a great musher, and he won the race after Lance had won it 4 years in a row. So and also he was the first native musher to win in a very long time. So I've always had a very soft spot in my heart for John Baker. So I'll have to go and check and see if that was him or not.
Right. All right, Alex, I know we're running out of time here, but I had to tell the story. Like I said, I hadn't watched that movie in a few years, and it is definitely a timeless classic for sure. So who is our musher profile for this evening?
So this evening's musher profile is from Freeborn Dog Mushing, Tim Muto. And he
Tim.
is he's a native of the suburbs of Chicago. Describes himself as being really a very urban type guy, wasn't into outdoors stuff very much when he was growing up. And then when he was in school, he started taking classes in outdoor management and recreation and kind of fell in love with the idea of the great outdoors. He came up to Alaska, I believe in 2013, didn't really have any clear idea of what he wanted to do, wasn't quite sure what a musher handler was, but got a job as a handler working for Karin Hendrickson. And he worked for her for 1 year, and then he started handling for Wild and Free Mushing and Brent Sass, and worked for Brent for 3 years, and then went on to work for Linwood Fielder at the Glacier in Juneau, leading glacier tours. Put together his own kennel with 6 dogs, still a very, very small kennel, 6 dogs who mostly were from Brent's bloodlines, and he is then completed his qualifiers in 2016, did a couple more in 2017, and is in the Iditarod this year with a team that has his 6 dogs as sort of the core, and then a couple of Linwood's dogs and a couple of Brent's yearling dogs. So he has kind of a mixture of those 3 different kennels. He's doing very well, very solidly in kind of the middle to the back of the pack this year. He said that his plan is just to finish, that he's looking at this as the start of a long-term mushing career. So he's in 51st place right now out of Caltag. I believe he is going across the ice right now. And really is someone who is looking at mushing as kind of a long-term. He said that he did an interview with some kids who are doing a podcast about the Iditarod and talked to them all about his journey to qualify for and complete the Iditarod. And they were asking about, well, how do you do this? And he's very solidly in that camp of people who come up through the handler ranks and then are able to complete a lot of their qualifiers using dogs for the team that they're handling for, and then make a little bit of money as a handler. It doesn't pay very well. It's a very hand-to-mouth type of existence. And he said that it's always been his dream for the past 5 or 6 years to run Iditarod. So even though he's going to finish this year with basically no money, he's looking forward to being out in the gorgeous scenery in Alaska and just being able to be with his dogs and the dogs that he's been working with from these 2 other kennels for a long time. He's a very grounded type of guy, and all of the interviews I've seen with him, he's very clear to. He has a clear sense of humor. He talks a lot about how he loves listening to music when he's on the trail. How he when he goes to sleep likes to have a podcast or some music playing when he goes to sleep. So we wish him very well. He's doing very well, solidly in the middle of the pack, and looks like he's going to complete his rookie year and get to Nome sometime in the next few days.
Awesome stuff. Tim is such a nice guy. I had him on Mushing Radio earlier this fall. He did a great interview. You can find it over on dogworksradio.com and just search Tim Muto. M-U-T-O is how you spell his last name. Yeah, what a guy. He was just so excited to get ready to run in his rookie year. And as you mentioned, he was going to run with Brent Sass's team and ended up switching over and coming down to Willow to run with Linwood and his group of dogs. They had to move, his whole operation down here, so to speak, and pretty much start fresh. But he is on the trail and doing very well, and I wish him the best. And I offered him the invitation of coming back on the show after he finished the Iditarod, and he said wholeheartedly he will do it without a doubt. So we're looking forward to having him on in the off season, and I think that will make a fun interview. I love having the rookies back on after they've done the race and completed it and can tell their story from their perspective. So we look forward to having him back on in the months to come. So if you are liking your coverage, make sure you hit that subscribe button on whatever podcast app or location that you use to find your podcast, and you can hear not only the rest of our coverage. We're going to be on for at least 4 or 5 more days, at least through the banquet here on our daily broadcast, and then we'll go back to sort of our off-season coverage after that. And we host pretty much a couple of times a month, if not more, throughout the year, Alex and I. Alex, we will have a winner, almost certainly, unless something really, really crazy happens. I remember listening to that interview last night with Dee Genre, how she said that she was holed up in some cabin on the trail for a couple of days as a storm moved in. I don't anticipate that happening this year, but anything is possible. But we should have a winner by the time we're on the air tomorrow. Do you have anything else you want to mention before we close for the evening?
Just wanted to say once again, if people have any sort of questions or criticisms or show ideas, please hit us up on social media. I'm at Coldfoot Films on Twitter, and Robert is at Robert Forto. We're both fairly active on Facebook, and I think we're relatively easy to get a hold of for our fans.
Yes, and I appreciate all the feedback we've gotten this year. I think we've had more downloads and listens this year than any other year up to now. We switched over hosting companies sort of late last summer when Alex and I went to Podcast Movement, and man, that has changed the nature of our podcast. I think it sounds much better than it has in the past. We have some really cool sponsor spots and things that we didn't have before, and just much easier access for folks to find our shows and listen and, do what they do, whether they're listening on the road or at work or on their computers or whatever. I'm really digging what we've done in the past year. Aren't you, Alex?
I really am, and it is, as always, it is a pleasure to co-host this with you and with Michelle when you were out on your expedition, and just has been really, really fun being able to connect with all of the different mushers and fans and people who really love this race and dog sledding in general.
Excellent. All right, buddy. On behalf of my co-host, Alex Stein, this is Robert Forto for Mushing Radio. We will be back tomorrow night for the March 14th coverage of the 2018 Iditarod. We'll talk to you guys next time. Goodbye.
Did you know that Alaska Dog Works trains service dogs for those in need throughout North America? Each and every service dog that is trained through the Lead Dog Service Dog Program and Michelle Forto and her team has an individual training plan. We train for autistic, mobility, psychiatric, and PTSD for our soldiers for service work. If you know of someone that may need a service dog, please take a moment and check out Alaska Dog Works on social media and at alaskadogworks.com.
If you like our podcast, there are a few things you can do. You can take a couple of minutes and go to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star review. You can also check out all of our DogWorks Radio sponsors and promotions in our show notes. Another thing you can do is go over to Facebook, like our Facebook page, and one last thing, please tell all of your friends by spreading the word about DogWorks Radio. Thank you so much for listening to us. We really appreciate you.
Dogworks Radio is produced by Robert Forto. Logo art by Angry Squirrel Studios. Dogworks Radio is produced in conjunction with KVRF 89.7 in Palmer, Alaska.
For dog training advice, you can contact Alaska Dogworks at 907-841-1686 or visit their website at alaskadogworks.com. If you have a show idea or would like to be a guest, please contact us by sending an email to live@dogworksradio.com.